Looking for the latest comic book to add to your collection? How about the last card for that Magic the Gathering Commander deck? Well, the comic book store's got you covered. Shop online at comicbookstore.tcgplayerpro.com or come in person at 30 North Main Street, Glassboro, New Jersey. Welcome back, pizza people. We've got a Sideboard guide here for you today. Hollywood Pizza here. And we're going to go over Selesnya Angels. This is a deck that's got me to Mythic. Essentially, this main deck got me to Mythic. I've been messing around a bit with the Sideboard. I think I've came to the Sideboard that I actually like myself. But overall, there's a gameplay video on this deck as well. There's going to be links in the description for that and my content as well. We'll go over the deck list here, though. We've got 4 Lunark Veterans to help gain some life whenever another creature that we control comes in, and we can disturb it later. And then whenever one of our creatures leaves the battlefield, we'll gain a life. We also have 3 Giadas, 4 Bishop of Hopes, 4 Innkeepers, and 2 Trellisaras as our 2-drops. The Giadas make our angels bigger and help us cast our angel spells. It's also a 2-mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance, so it's pretty good on stats. We've got 4 Bishop of Wings, essentially helps against any type of aggressive deck, and helps chain off like the combos that this deck essentially does. It kind of plays like an aggressive deck, but also can play like you're trying to find specific combo pieces. But essentially, you can gain some life off your angels when they come into play. You'll gain 4, and then if an angel dies, you'll actually get a 1/1 spirit, so you get some value as well. Let's say if like your opponent kills your cards, or they end up board wiping. The Innkeeper helps gain some life, same way that Lunark does, where another creature comes in, you'll gain a life. On top of that, for just 2 mana, it helps ramp, so you can kind of help hit your collected companies or some of your other cards that you may need to on time. 2 Trellisaras are great here as they help dig through your deck, especially since we have 4 Innkeepers and 4 Lunark Veterans. It can help kind of scribe through your deck. On top of that, it can end up being a big beefy threat or a good blocker against specific strategies. We have 4 Inspiring Overseer, which is just a good kind of grindy to mid to late game card where you can kind of help like gain an additional life point to get an angel if you need to off your Resplendent, or it helps you draw a card, kind of dig deeper into your deck for like some Cocos, whatever card you're missing. But it's going to be a card that we're actually going to sideboard a decent amount. It's not as crazy as the rest of the deck that you pretty much have here, but it does help fill out the curve and is a really good angel, probably like one of the better angels that you could be playing at this lower mana cost of 3. But we have 4 Righteous Valkyries and 4 Resplendent Angels. These are pretty much the big pieces of the deck. The Righteous Valkyrie gains life whenever another angel or cleric comes in, so essentially all your cards, except for the Innkeeper, are going to be angels or clerics, like the Trellisara and the Lunarks are clerics, and most of your cards are angels. But essentially when you have 7 or more than your starting life total of life, creatures you control get +2/+2, so it can kind of help get out of control, especially if you can collect a company into one of these with already having one out, or collect a company into 2 of them. The Resplendent Angel helps go wide and also can kind of help overwhelm your opponent while gaining more life. It's a 3-mana 3/3 flyer. At each end step, if you gain 5 or more life, you get a 4/4 angel with flying and vigilance. So with the Righteous Valkyrie and the Bishop of Wings, this can essentially kind of start to go off a bit. On top of that, if you don't have either of these cards, or you just don't have any life gain, just this by itself, for 6 mana you can make it a 5/5, hit your opponent, or essentially chump, get through a chump blocker, gain some life, and make another angel to help, essentially still overwhelm your opponent and kind of rebound the board state. But in terms of removal, we have 3 Skyclave Apparitions. These have been added before. We kind of just were trying to push through with our angels, but the Skyclave helps get rid of most problematic permanents, anything that's non-token for 4 or less. And when it dies, they do get a token, but usually killing the card is way more relevant than them getting a token. We also have 1 of Ajani, which helps against certain matchups, a card that we're also going to be sideboarding sometimes out of the deck, but very, very great in the mirror match. That's the main reason that I do enjoy having it in the deck. And 4 Collected Companies, which just help cast 2 of your cards and step at instant speed, essentially, and kind of just help combo off a bit pretty quickly. If your opponent's trying to target your things, you can kind of just gain some life in response and kind of get through the storm, essentially, if your opponent's playing some kind of like board wipes, some sweepers like that. For special lands, we have an Aganjo, a Boseiju, 1 Cave of the Frost Dragon to essentially help with the threats, especially if you just need to sink some mana into something. And the Aganjo can help as a removal spell, same with Boseiju, considering there's a lot of fables running around. The rest of the mana base, essentially, we've got, some shock lands, the farmland, the pathway, a couple sun petal groves as well. The sideboard specifically here, we have 2 Shaper Sanctuaries. We'll get into more of this here in a moment. We have 3 Rest in Pieces, 2 Heroic Interventions, a Lyra, a Guardian of Faith, 2 Redains, an additional Skyclave Apparition, and 2 Yasharns. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in and talk more about the sideboard here, what matchups you're going to be seeing these cards go in against, and kind of just a little bit more guidance in those matchups as well. Cat Oven, still just as popular as it's always been on the Explorer ladder. This matchup can go either way. Sometimes it really does depend on whether or not your opponent gets down the Mayhem Devil, but we're going to take out 4 Inspiring Overseers, 4 Lunarch Veterans, bringing in 2 Yasharns, 2 Redains, a Skyclave Apparitions, and 3 Rest in Peace. The Rest in Peace are great against the Cat combo itself, or potentially any other type of graveyard strategy, things that say when they die don't get their triggers. The Skyclave Apparition is great, gets rid of any other permanent. In play, you're mainly going to go after the Witch's Ovens or the Mayhem Devils. Your Redain is good overall. Essentially, the side that we're going to be playing is the shield side, where it takes a lot more mana for your opponent to kind of combo off on you. They can't just expect to sacrifice a bunch of their cards, have a bunch of free mana. It's going to take some work to kind of Mayhem Devil you out. And Yasharn essentially kind of just shuts the deck down completely against sacrifice. Your Overseers Lunarchs just aren't really that great, especially later in the game. They kind of get a lot worse, specifically against the Mayhem Devils. But that's mostly what you're going to try to be stopping here. The Rest in Peace kind of just stops the cat chain. Your Skyclave Apparitions make sure that you get rid of the Mayhem Devils. And the 2 Yasharns just really, really want to make sure that you get to those. Maybe even try to mulligan once to try to get to one of your sideboard cards, just because the Yasharn guarantees that you're going to be able to shut down their deck as long as it sticks. Fatal Push and a few other removal spells you're going to want to dodge, like Acclaim the Firstborn. But overall, the deck can be a lot easier if you kind of can go over the top quickly. But your sideboard cards are going to help you out. The Rest in Pieces are huge, and the Yasharn's huge. So these are all like the main pieces that you're going to be looking for. And that's kind of like my best advice, at least for this matchup, is kind of just go as fast as you can, gain a ton of life, and make sure that you save those Skyclave Apparitions as much as you can. There's some games where you might even seem like you can go after the Oven, but in reality, it's just better to go after the Devil itself when that comes down, because you can gain a lot more life than 1 or 2 cats, but when the Devil comes down and starts shooting all your creatures down, that's when things definitely become a problem. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you can try to get to your Sharn somehow, mulligan. But either way, I think that this strategy is going to be really, really helpful for you to take down this deck. Mirror Match. You definitely run into it. Angels can be really popular some days on the ladder. But what we're going to do here is pretty simple. Take out a Lunarch, take out an Inspiring Overseer, add a Lyra, and add a Skyclave Apparition. The Apparition helps get rid of any problematic angel on the other side. The Lyra makes sure that our angels are a little bit bigger and get lifelink, which can help us get over the top in the Mirror Match. And Inspiring and Lunarch just aren't really that great of cards overall here. The main thing that you're really going to want to be doing in this matchup is try to gain a lot of life, stabilize the board. If you can attack in with your tokens from your Resplendent Angels, great. If not, then kind of hold off as long as you can, get to a high, just keep gaining life, kind of just keep stalling. And then what you're really going to want to do is you're going to want to hit like a Trelasara with like one of your other life gain cards, like a Lunarch, like a Prosperous Innkeeper, maybe even a Bishop kind of helps sometimes in that regard. The Valkyrie, any of these life gain cards are great. But overall, the Trelasara is going to help you scry until you hit to an Ajani. So in this matchup, what it really comes down to is making sure that you stabilize the board. A, stabilize the board. B, go over the top. Or C, which is what you're probably going to be doing most of the time, is winning through the Ajani. Just using that 0 ability, exiling everything that your opponent has, and then just dealing like, upwards of like literally 1,000 damage. The other day we played this match on stream, and we were pretty much at 1,000 life, I think, all 3 games. So it was pretty ridiculous, but either way, it's definitely going to happen. You're just going to want to make sure that you get to that Ajani. That's the most important part. Get into that Ajani. But other than that, the Mirror Match is kind of a drag. You're both just going to be gaining tons and tons of life. But at the end of the day, you have at least one card that you know in your deck that's going to help you get out of it. Control, a little bit more of a tougher matchup. Whether it be Blue-White Control, Esper Control, Jeskai Control, there's all kinds of variants out there. But essentially, this gives you a basic guide to kind of dealing with whatever version you're going to be going up against. So we're going to take out an Aspiring Overseer, both Lunarch Veterans, 3 Skyclave Apparitions, and the Ajani. We're going to bring in 2 Heroic Interventions, 2 Shaper Sanctuaries, a Guardian of Faith, and 2 Redains. So essentially, The Lunarks, the Overseers, are a little bit slow, don't really do as much. You don't want to be drawing the Lunark veterans later. Ajani is fine, but you're not really using the ultimate ability. And Skyclave Apparition rarely has any targets at all and is really good at the rate that it's at. Heroic Intervention, the Guardian of Faith, help protect against any spot removal or board wipes. Shaper Sanctuary also helps great against spot removal, where you're just going to be redrawing some cards. Redain is really good here as well. Mostly just going to be playing on the front side this time compared to aggro, where the front side is going to make most of your opponent's spells cost some more mana, especially if they have board wipes, Teferis, Wandering Emperors, just Planeswalkers overall. It's definitely going to help tax them and help give them a little bit more of a harder time, especially if maybe you get like Resolve of Coco. Then you play Redain. Now you can make sure that, you know, the Farewell, the Doom Scar, Shatter Sky, anything like that's going to cost 2 more mana, so your opponent might just be dead now. But overall, you're mostly just trying to have your cards ready in response to a lot of their cards. You're going to have your Heroics, your Guardians against the board wipes. The Redain helps tax things, and the Shaper Sanctuary kind of helps the cards flowing, especially if your opponent's just kind of got a lot of pinpoint removal, just picking things off. So overall, it's a little bit of a tougher matchup, but it's definitely doable, especially if you get a really strong start, and then in the games 2 and 3, it's going to be really valuable to get that Heroic Intervention or the Guardian of Faith to make sure that you can kind of dodge the one big spell that could potentially end your game plan. Fight Rigging, an actually really favorable matchup as well for us. So we're going to take out 2 Inspiring Overseers, and we're going to bring in a Wilt and the Skyclave Apparition. So essentially, you should be able to easily gain enough life to go over the top of this deck with like your Valkyries, your Resplendents, anything like that. The Wilt kind of just helps in case we really need to destroy a Fight Rigging. Skyclave's kind of like in the same boat, where Skyclave's actually really good early, because there's games where maybe they can get a couple Regisaurs down and start to beat us down for more than what we can gain. So having access to that extra removal from the Apparition is just fantastic. So kind of time your collected companies right, maybe at instant speed to get rid of some cards in response to some Fight Riggings, or overall just gain tons of life and go over the top. Shouldn't really have too much of a problem against this matchup overall. Fires of Invention, quite popular archetype as well, different versions of it. Overall, let's go over what we're going to be taking out and putting in. We're going to take out an Ajani, Lunark Veteran, all 4 Overseers. We're going to bring in both Heroic Interventions, the Guardian of Faith, both Redains, and a Skyclave Apparition. So essentially, your Inspiring Overseers are a little bit too slow. The Lunark Veteran isn't doing as much either, but you still want to keep it just because it can kind of help chain out enough life that maybe you can kind of like stall out for a bit. The Ajani's kind of like in the same way, where it's not really doing anything too crazy, and on top of that, it might not even resolve depending on what version you're playing against. The Heroic and the Guardian of Faith help protect against any kind of board wipes, and a lot of the time they're going to be playing against this deck, it's going to be the Agent of Treachery version, so you're going to want to make sure that you hold on to your Guardian of Faith and your Heroic Interventions until your opponent's trying to go off with that. The Redain's also really good, where the front side is kind of just fantastic against them. Makes their spells cost 2 more mana if they have like a Fires in their hand, or if they have a Fires out, and that makes a lot of their spells cost 2 more, especially if they're like non-creature spells. The Skyclave can help get rid of a Fires of Intervention, or potentially like some other enchantments that your opponent might be trying to blink, if it's like the Yorion version, which is really popular as well. So there's all kinds of different versions of Fires, but essentially this is kind of like more like a general guide on what to do against the deck. You really want to like just keep your protection spells as much as you can against the Agent of Treacheries or the board wipes. Those are really the main things that are going to give you a problem. You should be able to kind of just go wide on your opponent and go over the top, but at the same time, there's just a few cards that can really blow you out, so you want to be ready for those. But I think that this is actually kind of like a little bit more of like an unfavorable matchup at the end of the day. So adding these cards in definitely gives you more of a chance, but you have to remember that it's still going to be a little bit more of like a tougher hill to climb against this deck, specifically if they start taking your lands or some of your better cards with like the Agent of Treachery's hardcast. If the game goes longer, then they have a higher chance of winning, so you're definitely going to want to try to shut the door as soon as possible. Ah, yes, Grease Fang combo, everyone's favorite, am I right? But seriously, this can kind of be a little bit more of like a toss-up sometimes. If the Grease Fang deck gets the early combo going, then you're going to have a little bit of trouble. But overall, what you're doing is a lot more powerful. It also depends on like how much removal they're really running. So we're going to cut in a Johnny, a couple Lunark Veterans, 2 Inspiring Overseers, bring in the Rest in Peace, Skyclave Apparition, and the Wilt. The Apparition can help get rid of the Grease Fang if they already have it down. The Wilt gets rid of, you know, the Parhelion if that's already out as well. You can kind of kill it in response to them crewing it. The Rest in Peace is just great against any version of Greasefang just because they're reliant on the graveyard. You might have a little bit more trouble against the Esper version, considering they're playing like Rafines and Ledger Treasures, so they're playing some cards that can get a lot bigger than you can get down some of your Angels. So for that matchup, you might actually want to bring in maybe like a Heroic Intervention. That's probably about it. I would suggest maybe cutting like another Inspiring Overseer and a Veteran, kind of just like pretty much trimming down on those. Keeping one of each is probably still fine, but overall this is still going to be like a toss-up. If they get the combo down early, then you're going to have a little bit of problem, but you can kind of like overpower them with like going wide with Angels. Resplendent's going to be one of your more important cards, kind of just getting more Angels on the battlefield. And of course Valkyrie is always great, where you can make your creatures a lot bigger than their Parhelion tokens or the Parhelion itself. So then they're kind of like in an awkward spot. But you're mostly going to try to like grind them out a bit to a certain degree, specifically in the Esper version. The Mardu, you have a little bit of a better shot overall, kind of if they combo, but at the same time, both versions of Greasefang do play a lot more removal, so you definitely have to be on the lookout for that. Kind of time your spells properly, your Collected Company is at instant speed, things like that. But with the Rest in Peace, the Wilt, it does give you a lot of an easier shot against it. You might even want to mulligan into the Rest in Peace. Some games really depends like what version of Greasefang you're playing against, if they're a little bit more aggressive. If they have more removal, things like that. But overall, I think it's more like a 50-50 matchup, at least from what I played against it, where there's games where I just go crazy over the top and my opponent doesn't really do anything. And there's games where even if they combo, we can still kind of just get there. But then there's also games where if we don't necessarily get like the best draw, or maybe stumble a little bit, then the Greasefang deck can definitely take over with all their Angels. So gonna be on the lookout for this deck. This is a deck that's very, very popular, a deck you're gonna see in tournaments. So hopefully after this guide, should have a little bit more of a easier time against it, but still be on the lookout for it. It's really popular. All kinds of versions as well. Boy, oh boy, do I love seeing some creature decks. Humans, another fantastic matchup for us. We're going to go down 2 Inspiring Overseers, 2 Lunarch Veterans. Lunarch's great, but sometimes you end up just chump blocking with it until you can get to your later Angels anyways. And the Overseer, on rate, it's not the best. We're going to bring in the 2 Redains, the Skyclave Apparition, and Lyra Dawnbringer. Dawnbringer, great against any deck with creatures. Skyclave Apparition helps get rid of any problematic threat that's out early. And 2 Redains. The front side isn't the best part of it, even though the front side could potentially stop a Collected Company. The back side, of course, the shield, getting in once again here against another creature deck. Overall, this matchup is a lot like lopsided in your favor here. Shouldn't have too much of a problem taking it down. You're just going to make sure you get a lot of your Angels on the battlefield, gain a ton of life, and then kind of just like slowly chip away at your opponent or just deal them a ton of damage in one hit. A lot of the time what they're doing isn't as crazy as what you're doing. The Thalia's Lieutenant's the only card that could potentially get out of hand, but most of the time it doesn't really do anything like that. This is just a very, very favorable matchup every time that I played it, so not really much else to say. Just add a few more cards that kind of help round out the deck, and you shouldn't really have too much of a problem with the humans. Mono Blue, also known as Spirits, is a lot more of an easier matchup. We've got pretty much another deck that's based around creatures. Our deck can usually beat up the creature decks pretty well, so we're going to be cutting a Johnny, couple Lunarch Veterans, a little bit slower, clunkier cards you don't want to see later in the game either. Specifically the Lunarch. Now, Johnny can be good sometimes against blue, but also getting it on the battlefield could be tough. You don't just want to be stuck with the 4-drop in your hand, especially if you're kind of in chump block mode. And the Spirits deck can be a little bit faster sometimes than what we're doing. We're going to bring in the Skyclave Apparitions and the 2 Redains. Skyclave kind of helps get rid of any spirit that's given us a problem. Potentially the Spirit, that's the lure that gives all the other cards +1/+1. On top of that, the Redain, the shield side, of course, always great against any creature strategy. Making most of their 1/1s, anything like that, kind of just not do anything. Even if they end up pumping their creatures, the shield down kind of just means they still can't really like potentially have like good attacks if we have other creatures with flying out, which we're most likely to have considering we're not cutting any of the Angels out of the deck. On top of that, we can hit the Skyclaves and Redains from the Cocos. The front side of Redain is actually really good here as well, where it's going to be able to make your opponent's lands come into play tapped, so that's actually not bad. And if they happen to have anything that's a non-creature spell 4 or greater, you're going to be able to kind of like negate that for a few turns as well, which is really fantastic. So overall, a really, really good matchup already, and adding these cards in should make it even better. Mono Green, bit of an interesting aggressive matchup. A lot of the time, you have a great game against any deck that revolves around creature, and this deck is no different. So you're going to take out all 4 of your Inspiring Overseers. They're a little bit slow and clunky. The 1 life plus the fact that most of mono greens creatures are like 5 powered, 4 toughness, things like that. Not really that great here. We're going to bring in the Lyra Dawnbringer, which is just great against any creature matchup. Skyclave Apparition to help kind of remove anything extra that's early. And the Redain here as well, just like any of the aggressive matchups. We play the shield side, and it helps us kind of block a little bit better or take less damage overall in the beginning of the game. So not really much here. You're just going to take out your slow clunky card, and you're going to bring in the life gain, the removal, and some more of the protection with the Redain. So overall, you shouldn't really have too much trouble with this deck. You're just going to want to make sure you get your Valkyries, your Resplendents, kind of just start gaining a ton of life, your Bishops, things like that. And then kind of just like help finish it off as well, potentially if you just get that Lyra from the sideboard. But shouldn't have too much trouble. Get your Skyclaves in there for removal. And the main thing that you're also going to be wanting to watch out for against this deck is going to be Collected Company. The front side of Redain is actually great against that, and some of the green decks play Blizzard Brawl, so they're going to be playing Snow Permanents. The front side of Redain is also great against that, making their lands come in taps. So tons of use there from your sideboard. On top of that, you can also hit the cards that are coming in with your own Collected Company, so that's always a big upside. But shouldn't have too much trouble against this deck. And here's some more guidance as well. Mono Red is actually a really good matchup, but there's nothing wrong with making a good matchup even better. We're going to take out 3 Inspiring Overseers and a Johnny, and we're going to bring in a Lyra Dawnbringer, 1 Skyclave Apparitions, and 2 Redains. The Inspiring Overseers, even though they gained 1 life, that's not really that great. We want to be getting a big abundance of life at once. And 3 mana for a 2/1, also not really that great, especially if they're playing things like Chain Whirlers. The Ajani is just a little bit too slow. It can kind of just be like attacked into, and you don't necessarily want to just be like in chump block mode just to protect your Planeswalker. We're going to bring in the Lyra Dawnbringer, even though that's a 5-drop. The upside of it with that lifelink, the first strike, being able to give all your other angels lifelink and kind of just like end the game at once. Skyclave to give us a little bit more removal against anything that's early and often. And then we have 2 Redains, which the front side of it is okay, just because if they're playing like Snowlands, you're going to be able to tap them down. But the main reason that we're really playing the Redain is the second side of it, which is the Valkyrie, which is the shield side of it. So essentially, it prevents 1 damage that gets dealt to your creatures, either from combat or from spells. And on top of that, it also makes it so that anything that targets your creatures is going to cost an additional 1 mana. So that's definitely helpful in this matchup and some of the other aggressive matchups. But overall, I think that this is already going to be a deck that you're not really going to have too much of a trouble with. The main card that you're going to be on the lookout is going to be Rampaging Ferocidon. So that's the main reason to hold your Skyclave Apparitions as long as you can, is to just get rid of that card specifically, so that way you can continue gaining life and you're not just taking damage. But the shield also can help negate some of the Ferocidon. If you end up getting the shield down, you just don't take any damage from the Ferocidon anymore from your creatures coming in, so that can help stall a little bit. And considering a lot of the time your creatures are just a little bit better on rate, it can help kind of get to the Skyclave Apparition. But that's mostly the card that you're trying to dodge in this matchup, and overall you're just going to gain a ton of life and kind of overwhelm red, so shouldn't be too hard for you. Omnath decks come in all varieties, including forms like Niv Mizzet, and even just elemental versions. But overall, we've got a pretty decent strategy for you here to be able to take this deck down. So we're going to go down 1 Ajani, 1 Inspiring Overseer, 2 Lunarch Veterans, and we're going to bring in the Skyclave Apparition, 2 Heroic Interventions, and a Guardian of Faith. Essentially, the Skyclave Apparition helps get rid of Omnath or some other problematic permanents that they might have, like a Risen Brief, anything like that. Their interventions help protect against the board wipes that they might have, like a Clarion or potentially Doom Scars, anything like that. Same goes with the Guardian of Faith. Essentially, that's like what you're mainly trying to dodge. The Lunarch, the Inspiring, and the Johnny are just a little bit too slow for this matchup. Not really cards that you want to see. But overall, you're mostly just trying to get around the board wipes, maybe potentially some spot removal that they might have if they're playing the Niv Mizzet version. But you should be able to go over the top of what they're doing and kind of grind them out a bit, go wide and go tall. So shouldn't really have too much of a problem against the deck. There are going to be games where it's going to be closer if they draw a lot more removal or if they do hit their board wipe against you. So I know I've stressed that a bit here talking about the Sideboard guide against this deck, but that's the one thing that you're really trying to avoid, is just the board wipe and potentially just like tons of removal. So either way, shouldn't have too much of a problem with it, but after this, should make it a lot easier. Opus Creativity decks have been on the rise, and they actually happen to be a lot more of a tougher matchup for this deck, but hopefully after this sideboard guide you should have an easier time about it. So we're going to take out an Aspiring Overseer, 4 Lunarch Veterans, and a Johnny, 3 Skyclave Apparitions. We're going to bring in all 3 Rest in Pieces, 2 Heroic Interventions, 2 Shaper Sanctuaries, and 2 Redains. So essentially the Lunarchs, the Overseers, the Ajani's, the Apparitions not really that great in this matchup. Apparitions not targeted much outside of the Fable, and we can kind of go over the top of that, or by the time that they're trying to do that, it's probably just too late for us either way. So we don't really want to get stuck with just the 3-mana 2/2 that's not really doing anything. Ajani's kind of in the same way. It's 4 mana. It's a Planeswalker, but this isn't necessarily like the matchup that we want it for. Lunarch's just kind of dead later in the game, and the Overseer is just a little bit more of like an expensive card than what we want at the rate. The Rest in Pieces help with the graveyard, especially, if they're trying to use the Gearhulks to get back the spells from the graveyard. We have 2 Heroic Interventions and the Shaper Sanctuaries to essentially help against targeted removal spells. The Shapers doesn't necessarily protect outright, but it does help keep the cards flowing and help replace a lot of the cards that your opponent may try to kill. The Redain's great as well, as if you have the front side of Redain down, then your opponent's going to have a harder time getting the card from the graveyard with the Gearhulk. They're going to need 2 additional mana just to be able to cast it. And on the other side of Redain, you actually have the shield side, which also helps protect in the fact that your opponents have to spend more mana just to target your creatures, and then it's actually less damage being dealt as well. So overall, I think that this is actually going to be a really tough matchup, especially if your opponent gets the Opus down early, which is why maybe trying to mulligan into these Rest in Pieces or some of your more protection spells, the Redains, is a lot better, because most of the time they're just trying to combo as fast as they can, and you're actually just trying to go over the top. If you can go over the top, get some Valkyries down with your Cocos, anything like that, then you're going to easily get your creatures out of, damage spells, but it's going to be a lot harder if your opponent kind of just has some removals and then ends up comboing off. So that's why the Rest in Pieces and Redains are pretty much so vital, because they kind of help tax and or just outright get rid of the graveyard, and I think that that's very, very valuable in this matchup. So overall, try to go over the top as fast as you can against this deck, or mulligan into your sideboard cards, and I think that that's the best strategy for it. Rakdos Midrange is a pretty popular deck that you're definitely going to see on the ladder. It's more of, feels like sometimes in this matchup, more of a control deck, but a lot of the time, some of their threats don't really match up well against yours, mostly because you're going to have some bigger creatures, some flying creatures, but they do have a lot of removal to kind of keep some of your good cards down, so we're going to try to get through that. We're going to get an Ajani, 2 Lunarch Veterans, and an Overseer out of the deck. We're going to add 2 Shaper Sanctuaries and 2 Heroic Interventions to kind of help give us a little bit more of some card advantage, as the Shaper Sanctuary kind of trades card for card with their removal spells. Kind of you end up being a card up, though, so that way you can kind of keep playing some other creatures to grind them out. The Heroic Interventions are great. They can prevent spot removal or potentially like a board wipe if they have anything like that. Most of the time they don't, but still there just in case there's like Anger of the Gods, anything like that out of the sideboard. But a lot of the time you're just going to be using the Heroic Intervention to kind of stop like a Fatal Push or like any kind of like removal spell overall, like a Valkyrie, a Resplendent Angel, anything like that. The Overseers, the Ajani's, and the Lunarchs are just a little bit too clunky and not as good later in the game, specifically the Lunarch. The Ajani can be okay sometimes, but it's not really a card that you want to keep in the deck, as the value of it isn't so high a lot of the time. It kind of just goes out and can block maybe with the token that it makes, or on top of that, just eat some damage, which is fine, but that's not necessarily like what we're really trying to get out of 4 mana of a spell. But overall, this is a lot more of like a grindy matchup. You're going to make sure that you leverage your sideboard and make sure that you leverage your collected companies accordingly, considering that those are going to be some of your best cards here. But overall, I think it's still like a pretty solid matchup, and you shouldn't have too much of a trouble with it after this guide. So there you have it. Some more guide towards any matchup that you may be having a problem with while you're playing Selesnya Angels, or maybe even some different types of versions of Angels. But overall, I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you made it this far, don't forget, hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment down below. All would be greatly appreciated, and it's free. Come check out all my content. We host 3 free tournaments as well monthly. They definitely got some cash prizes as well. Check out all those links in the description below, and I hope that you stay cheesy.